Hey guys, this is Mikro. I'm doing a video on consume management. So with consumes, you have a lot of options, and depending on your class, you'll probably choose between a few different things. But most people at this point run health potions as well as regeneration potions and cleanse potions on their bar. There are like some exception to this, like healers, you don't have to run regeneration potions or cleanse potions, but with healers, you generally have to give up one potion, a slot that most people use to run those uh, mana potions because they use so much mana in a war. But everyone else has like a pretty similar debate in terms of like what you should be running, where and when. At the moment, what I would run is I run tier 5 dust or tier 4 dust if it's not as hard of a war. And then I run cleanse pots, healthy pots, or health pots, and regeneration pots. Some people prefer to run the mana pots with healthy toast, which I think is valid because it is like another like basically a regeneration pot, but instantly. The reason why I like regeneration pots is like firstly because I don't have healthy toast because that is you have to pay for, and I don't like paying for jewelry that isn't insane or doesn't have like a great benefit. And then second of all is you can run a regeneration pot and then pre-pop it when you go into a fight. And then if you do that, then it actually is like better than a healthy toast because you could pop your consume before you go into the fight and you don't actually have to worry about popping it during a fight. And that's like something I'm gonna get into here in a bit where you wanna when you wanna pre-pop your cooldowns, like your regeneration pot, your cleanse pot, your dust, versus like when you wanna hold them and use them reactively. And this is like situational and depends on the timings in the war. I would show you guys some of this in game, but I was messing around with a build in OPR yesterday that I was experimenting with for the next patch and got temporarily banned, so seeing if that can get appealed, but for now I can just go over it by looking at old VODs, as well as maybe in a different video talking about what I'm thinking about might be good for next patch, but the whole basis of that was just off of Ice Gauntlet getting nerfed, but I could talk about that in a different video. But yeah, when it comes to your options, these are just going through like everything we have right now on the PTR. There are some new things, like there are potions that reduce the damage that dots do to you. There's potions that increase your stamina, and those seem very interesting. It's just a matter of if they override certain effects that you already have, then they might not be run. But regeneration pots, they restore health and mana. I don't think most people realize that the mana thing is a thing. So it's like a case for it to be run with healers as well as it being good with mages. There's like there are some builds that I've run in the past where I used regeneration pots almost strictly for the mana, which doesn't make a lot of sense unless you play those builds and then you realize that like the extra 30 mana that you get is actually like very helpful because it keeps you above certain thresholds. And then there's infused health pots. These are pretty basic. They heal for about half your HP. They are very useful, but you use them almost always less than regeneration pots. Regeneration pots in a war setting and in OPRs even, if you're playing it very competitively, you want to be using these almost off cooldown. The reason why I use them almost all the time, and you use these before you go into a fight, is because over the duration of a fight, this will heal you about as much as like 2 to 3 ticks of a sacred, or if you're playing in a sacred, then it will heal a lot more than that as well. So it's like an extra heal that you could pop on yourself, and there's no reason to really not do it. And this is something I talked about in a previous video where I got yelled at for not using enough of these in a war. And I've heard of people using as many as like 70 regeneration pots in a war if they're a bruiser. And I think about 50 is normal for most classes. Healers, it will. Well, I've not really seen many healers like run these. They don't really use them as often. But you, even with healers, you'd want to pop these pretty consistently. The nice part about running them as a healer too is it keeps you at full HP, which will let your diamond proc. So I don't think it's a troll thing to run as a healer either. There's also a pot called an Infused Focus pot that exists, not very popular. I'm not sure if this works with Healthy Toast. If it did work with Healthy Toast, I could see an argument for it being better than mana pots in some circumstances. But this I have run very early on in the game, but it is like kind of nice because it basically makes it so you don't have to worry about mana. But then there's also alternatives with mana, like you could pop uh energizing hearty meal, and like if you pop this as your last buff, it won't actually override anything. And as long as you don't pop a healthy or like a hearty meal, then it won't override this effect, and you'll just constantly be generating mana faster, and that's very helpful. So this is like 30% regeneration, and then I believe this one is like closer. Well, it's 1% mana every second, so it's like it's a big deal. You really notice with the infused focus pot, like you're generating like almost 10 mana every 2 to 3 seconds. I think the tick rate might be faster in a second if I remember. It ticks very, very fast, and you notice these. Mana pots are a thing. They're not really a consideration for any class but healer unless you're running Healthy Toast and no play for that. But if you run Healthy Toast, then you can't run Gemstone or Cleanse Pot on bar usually. You have to decide between one of those. And I think if you really, really wanted to min-max the game, you would run Healthy Toast, and then you would run the Mana Pot, and then you would have your cleansing or on your bar, and then you would have your dust in your inventory, and then you would search in the search menu for dust and haste with a space between them. And the reason why you do that is so that you can see both dust and haste in your inventory, which are the two things you'll be clicking in a war or something like that. And then you could choose like which consumable to pop where and when. And besides dust, you have a few other options. Infused fire absorption pots aren't as popular. I'll probably go back to these in a second. And then you also have powerful oak flesh bomb, which is popular. So maybe if you're deciding, if you were like really min maxed, and you were like, oh, I'm going after these Dex players and they're all using bow, then you'd pop the oak flesh before you go in there. But if you're going like into a clump, then you might pop gemstone dust because you're more worried about getting bursted from grav wells, which will do void damage if you're not like warded towards that. Fire absorption pots are interesting. I have run these before as a deady point. I don't think as any other class but a deady point they're as much of a consideration. The reason why they're a consideration as a deady point is the oak flesh bomb and the gemstone dust. If you read this conditional here, it's 35% ward for 20 seconds or until any damage is received 15 times. So what does any damage mean, right? If you get shot from a blunderbuss has 8 shots that are shot at once, and that counts as like or up to 8 shots. It's usually 6 unless they run a special perk. But basically, if you get shot by a blunderbuss at all, it's going to remove this entire powerful oak flesh bomb effect, and it will remove the entire gemstone dust effect. But if you need to live for like 1 to 2 seconds, and that's all you need to live, then it's like not an issue, right? But then if you look at these infused fire absorption pots, the really cool thing about this is they don't have that conditional where it can fall off after you receive damage a certain amount of times. So if you pop this, you get 15% fire ward for 30 seconds unconditionally. There's nothing else like this in the game that's like really useful. It's only the fire ward for now. But this in a meta where Blunderbuss is really good and the grenades do a lot of damage and some people are still running Fire Staff is not a bad consideration. And then you can use that fire ward that you would normally put on your gems and put it towards something else. Like you could put it in a general like an opal that would just cover like mage damage or gravel damage or basically anything that's not physical, elemental damage, there's the word. Or you can put it into more slash damage or something along those lines. So you have a lot of different options here. I think there is like an argument to min-max stuff where you go healthy toast and then you do some crazy stuff where you put things in your inventory and then you're constantly going through your inventory in the war and then popping things. In reality, it's like very difficult to do, and I don't really know of people that do it because it is difficult to do. Because if you open your inventory and you get hit by anyone at all, it removes like you get knocked out of your inventory, right? It's not as easy as just like, oh, I'm gonna hit the inventory and then hit this button. Like in reality, it should be that simple, but it's not that easy. It is possible though, and I could see the argument for doing that with like oak flesh gemstone or fire absorption pots because you'd have the option of like which one do you want to use when and where, which is interesting at the minimum. And then you like if you're going to a big clump, you might want a fire absorption pot because you know it's the dust will get worn off right away and the oak flesh will get worn off right away. Uh, and you also don't pop these very often because the cooldown on these, I believe, is like around 90 seconds. I wish it said that on. Okay, it's 120 seconds. But then if you have the perk, the refreshing toast, then it will be about 90 seconds because that will reduce it by 28%, which is almost a third, or almost it's a little bit over a fourth. So yeah, if you're not using refreshing toast, then your earring is not wearable in a war setting too. If that has not been made clear to you by anyone in the past. So you have like a lot of different options there. What I run, I usually would go with dust, and then I would go with cleanse pots, health pots, and regen pots in a war. And then I would have haste in my inventory, and I'd either type out haste or I would just manually click it and activate it. If I had healthy toast, I would probably put in a mana pot here or an infused focus pot if it gave the same effect as a mana pot, and then do the same thing. The only reason why I would think it would infuse focus pot could be better is you could pre-pop it as well, and because the cooldown's so short, you could also use it as like a health pot in the middle of combat, but then pre-combat you could just pop it, so then I wouldn't have to worry about like IGVG cooldowns. I'd probably just use whichever one's cheaper though. I don't think it really makes a big difference. In terms of like when you want to pop certain cooldowns uh usually we want to pop your dust proactively. What I mean by proactively versus reactively, which I'll talk about in a second, is proactively you're popping something before you actually get into the fight. The reason why you would do this is you'd pop it so you don't have to pop it mid-fight, right? Like a regeneration pot, if you have to waste time popping that mid-fight, you can be dead in that circumstance. But if you're using a health pot, that's something that you kind of have to pop mid-fight. But something like dust, cleansing, and regeneration pots, you don't have to necessarily pop in the middle of a fight. Cleansing's a weird circumstance because there's certain situations in a war where this will change because you have a limited amount of cleansings. Like if you are early on in a war, you'll have less cleansings, so I would tend to use these more reactively more than proactively, meaning I would use them when I see I have disease debuff and I need to pop that in order to stay alive, but I wouldn't necessarily just pop it and then go into a clump. In the middle of a war or any time I am in fort, I'm always popping these all the time when I'm going into a clump, as well as regeneration pots and then dust. Sometimes there are circumstances where I'll hold off on the dust if it's an easier war because I know I can and don't want to spend the gold, but then the best practice is better just to use these. And if you have that problem like me where you are worried about using too much gold on that kind of consume and you're not getting compensated for it in some wars, that's when it's a good idea to run the tier 4 dust because it's like a 25% ward versus a 35 and it lasts a little bit less time. But it's still good and noticeable, and it will get you out of those situations where you would have just died, but you just live because you have that. So you see now in this VOD, I don't have any cleanse because I've had to use them all reactively. This is like, still in a fine spot where I could still buy from the flag if we win this fight. But then you see I'm like really being careful about my positioning because I know if I get caught here, I'm just dead. So that's why I'm trying to play spaced away from all my teammates because I know if I'm alone, they're less likely to use heavy CC on me and then just kill me because I stacked on top of each other people on top of people, and that's what IGVGs and Great X look for. So then, like once you cap a flag, that's when people usually look to buy their cleanse pots, and then they'll restock, and then they'll put them in their bar, and then you go from there. That's just like general macro of what you do. I didn't mention this before, but when you're puffing your bots, when you're popping your buffs before the war, you want to pop your food and then your honing in any order. It doesn't matter, and then you want to pop your mana food last. This is because the mana food can override certain effects. I don't know if it still does, but that's what it used to do. Like, and I'd just rather not risk it at this point. So I think if you want to be safe, do that. I could probably test that, uh, like in a few days or maybe if this ban actually gets appealed, because I was doing too well with OPRs with the new build, I guess. But you see that I'm popping the regeneration pots before I'm even taking serious damage, and I'm not popping cleanse pots all the time, but when I'm going into a big pot clump, that's when I know to pop the cleanse pots. You won't ever, if you ever have to use your pots in the middle of a fight when they're crashing too, it's really, really bad. Because if you're just healing when they're doing damage to you, they're just gonna keep doing damage, right? So like what's that healing really doing? It's buying you time. And then like if you're just gonna die anyway, then that's not really doing anything, right? Like if you're healing up but they're crashing on you, it doesn't do anything. You want to meet those crashes with pressure or like of your own. So like a big skill set is knowing like when they're gonna crash, which is usually around the 75% mark. And that's when you want to pop your regen pot, you want to pop your cleanse pot, and then you want to go into those clumps and you want to meet them head on. And if you're scared, they'll win. But if you're not scared and everyone in your army is not scared and knows to do that, that's when you have a better chance of actually winning these fights. So another concept that is more difficult, I'd say, is knowing when to buy coin spots versus like when to tempo. Once you win a point, like if you win a point decisively, sometimes IGLs will call it a tempo and like just go for the gate. So that's when people just run past everyone, go to the gate immediately, and then break it, which is what I'm doing here. And the reason why you do that is because the defenders aren't set up, and because you just killed them. So then you have an opportunity to snowball the war and win faster. And then you buy the cleanse pots later. This is like especially good if everyone's like on a good amount of cleanses. But if you are really low cleanses and you do this, you can just get wiped and then just lose, because there's like a certain duration in the war where if they have horns up and you're breaking the gate, which is why you shoot the gate first. If you shoot players and they have horns up, they're just going to get healed immediately, right? Because they have that 22.5% global resist and 500 health per second, the buff that will stay on them unless you strip it with a Void Gauntlet. So that's why people early on usually just ignore the players in front of them and they'll immediately run to the gates and they'll probably hitting the siege over actually fighting. Like if you have to fight, you have to fight, but you want to be hitting the siege as much as you can because the siege damage is permanent and everyone else will usually get healed while there's horns up, assuming that the defenders have competent people that can actually break or actually use the horns consistently. There's some people that just don't blow horns, and if that doesn't happen, you can do whatever you want. Probably gonna speed this up a bit, but this is just an example of a war that we had on East and took it versus a company that's supposed to be decently good. I think they have like 3 territories or something like that, but we usually just didn't attack them because they were kind of boring to play against and we just beat them consistently. There's not much in terms of cooldown usage here, just breaking the gate. Once the gate goes down, though, you'll see if there's people inside. That's when I'm looking to pre-pot. And you see me pre-pot my Quens and then my regen pots before I actually go through the gate. I probably would have been better to also pop the dust. Now I pop the dust because I'm in a really bad spot. But you see like that concept of me not always popping every cooldown, but popping a lot of the cooldowns that I can. And one thing you can do if you get into fort early is you can help break down the other gates, and you can also stop people repairing gates by shooting them on the inside, and that helps people get in faster. And this is the stuff I went in the other video with the attacking, where you want to shoot the cleanse stations first, and then you want to shoot repair stations, and then you want to shoot the horns. I'm just constantly using this opal to its maximum effect, so that I have that increased damage buff, and then I'm dropping AoEs on the horn as well because it gives me increased damage in my ice gauntlet, as well as doing damage to the horn. So it's like it works for both things. Once all the horns are down, which you can see that most of the horns are down because we are good at this point, then we'll look to actually put pressure on point. But before we actually just go to point, we'll try to get kills for a little bit, right? And you play off that respawn. We just talked about the respawn timer a bit. It's like once you get a wipe, that's when you usually look to, you try to do it right when the respawns happen, and you immediately go to point so that you have as much time as possible to tick before they can crash on you. And when they crash, that's when you want to pre-pot your consumes and then beat them head on. This I don't think is very good gameplay because I'm just shooting a healer when I could be taking point, but I'm playing the edge of point because I'm IGVG, and that's where IGVG does best. You see me holding shower, I'm holding the shower for the crash. This is like a crash now, so I'll drop the shower, I'll drop the oblivion, and then I'll just start popping my consumes over and over and over again. You see we have cannons in the back. Those cannons are just for healers to dodge the decks that are there. So if they have like a schizo that's on them, I'll hop in a cannon, and the schizo can't actually get on them because they're a melee. And it's also a way to get around like range players doing a lot. And then yeah, this is a pretty easy war, but you see the concept of like when I'm pre-popping versus when I'm popping in the middle of a fight. And I hope that helped a little bit. That combined with stamina usage will help lead to wars where you don't die as much. And then you can get pretty good stat lines. Like I got top assists here, and I'm going back 8, and I'm definitely not playing to pad. I was looking for a lot of pressure there as well. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.